I met Paul. I've known Paul for about 17 years. I met him in, I think it was 2000 when we opened the shelter at 1500 Main Street. And he and his friend Pat would come in, and they were, believe it or not, what we now call pet pals. They were our first pet pals. That is, they came in and they would hold kitties and pet them and groom them and give them love. And we saw Pat and Paul down there a lot. There weren't very many of us that ran that shelter. This has grown a great deal. And so I was down there a lot. And starting the cleaning in the morning to closing at night, so it has changed a lot. They continued on doing that, and I want to tell you about one particular cat. Now, I was doing trapping, which I did for 16 years, and that's trapping feral cats. We spay and neuter them, and then we release them. And so any calls of stray cats, I would get the call. So I got a call, and I lived over towards the ocean. It was a street up behind me, so I went there, and it was this lady by the name of Prima Diva. Now, this is Cambria. We do have people, you know. And Prima Diva had, and her day was quite a performer from what I learned. And Prima Diva had a cat that had shown up on her doorstep. And she had a cat named Sammy, and Sammy didn't like this cat. And this was an all-black cat with a white spot here. So she named that cat Mr. T, from the character Mr. T that wore the big jewelry, if some of you remember that. So I took Mr. T home and brought him into HART. And he was there for a while, and then we, as we do now, look for foster homes. So Mr. T went to a foster home at the old Air Force Base, which is way up in the mountains, okay, way on top of the hill. And Mr. T was there, it was about 2 weeks, and this is a long ways from where Prima Diva lived. At least 5 miles to go straight through the forest. So I get a call from Prima Diva, it's about 8 o'clock at night, and she says, "Bye, Mr. T's back." And I said, "No, he can't be. He's up on the mountaintop. He's here." "Okay, I'll be right there." Mr. T had made his way through about 5 miles of forest back to Prima Diva's. And Mr. T wasn't a young cat. Mr. T was an older guy, but he knew where to go. So I took Mr. T into HART the next day. And he was in the front room in a cage. And that was the day that Paul said to me, "Bonnie, what's your least adoptable cat?" And I said, "Well, Paul, that would have to be a black one, because they're the last ones that go. Don't know why, but that usually is it." And I said, "And the older ones, because everybody wants a young kitten." So I said, "That's Mr. T right here, and he would be the least adoptable cat here. Well, I'm going to adopt him." So that was Paul's first HART cat. And Mr. T became Scruffy. So if any of you ever heard of Scruffy, that was the first cat that he adopted. And Scruffy lived, I don't know how much longer, maybe a couple years at the most. But Paul used to fix him these special scrambled eggs and all these special meals. And I tell you, Scruffy lived the life of Riley, really. There's a cat named Riley.
I remember Paul telling me about that.
Paul had several cats. Now these are just a few. I have a file on my computer that's called Paul's Cats. And Connie is adopting Barkley, one of Paul's cats that he had when he passed. And we have Macho here, who is still available. Now, these were all old cats. I think this was some feral cats I'll tell you about. But you'll notice this cat was a little different. The rest of them were black, but this guy wasn't. But he was an older guy, and I think he was an office cat for a while. Einstein? Didn't he? His name was Einstein, okay? Well, Paul decided Einstein should come live with him. But Einstein was, calling him Einstein was just much too proper. So he soon became Albert. And Albert played a wonderful, happy life there. I think this is Blackjack. Up above Paul's house, there was a lady that had a feral colony. All the cats had been spayed and neutered, and there was about 6 of them. And she passed away. So I would go up and feed, and so Paul took over that duty for these 6 cats. And it wasn't that far, maybe 3 or 4 houses up away from me. And one of the cats was black, a huge black male. And he thought that Paul was the best thing he'd ever found. He would be out there every morning on the brick wall waiting for Paul to come. Now these feral cats, soon Paul had made under his house special beds for all of them with heat lights under there. So they would all be warm and dry and cozy all year long. They lived a very good life. Now, I worked for a long time at a gallery in the West Village called Artifacts, and that's just down the hill from where Paul's house was. So Paul would get in the habit, I had a half-hour lunch. Brian, what time are you going to lunch? I'll meet you. So I'd eat my 2 bananas, and he'd bring me a sandwich, and we'd have lunch in the little back room of Artifacts and discuss everything you can think of, including how to build that shelter, the room. And one day, I got a call from Pat, Paul's friend, and she says, Bonnie, can we come down and have lunch with you? And I said, sure, come on down, let me see, probably 1. So she came down, and she had a brand new engagement ring on. And they were like 2 teenagers. They really were. It was a glorious time for them. I remember them picking out the curtains for the bedroom. I remember them picking out, going to Fresno to try out mattresses. Scraping the stuff off the ceiling in the kitchen and putting in new counters. And so that was really a good time. Unfortunately, Pat did pass away. But it was a happy time to see and to share in. And when Paul, or one time, just to let you know why I have this on, I got an email from Pat and Paul, and they said, Bonnie, go to this website because this is you. You have to have this. Ask not what your cat can do for you. Ask what you can do for your cat. And it's true. They knew me well. Paul and Pat came over for brunch one time at my house and brought me this. Every life should have. Well, I think count the ferals, Paul's exceeded that. He knew I would. I have. And as we said, I just adopted a 15-year-old here to add to my other 5 cats. So it's a loving thing. And this sits in a place in my house that's been sitting there for years. Paul was on the adoption committee for me when I was helping with that. He worked on all kinds of projects here, and Terry's going to go into those. Any of you who would like to go through our shelter, I wanted to tell you that if you check out what we call the fireplace room, in there is a board where we have our senior cats, pictures of our senior cats, okay? Because we have seniors for seniors, and so if you're 62 and the cat's over 8, you can take that cat home with you. Well, on that board, and it's still there, I checked this morning, is Paul's picture, adoptable cat. And it's still there.
Senior.
Adoptable senior, that's what it said. Yeah, Terry put it there. And Paul was pretty proud of that, I think. Now,
I think, Bonnie, I think it was senior cat up for adoption.
oh, maybe it is.
I love that.
It's in there.
Senior cat.
Yeah. Now, all of us know about Paul's cars, the Teslas, of course. There was Tessie 1 and Tessie 2. And I can guarantee you that most of us in this room were invited to take a test drive. And a lot of us did and really enjoyed that. And he was so funny when he came back after taking the first one to his son. You'd see him and he'd go, I'm in Tesla withdrawal. I can't handle this. I'm in Tesla withdrawal. So next thing you know, we have Tesla 2. My friend Marilyn, who did these wonderful pictures, wanted me to share one thing, one of her last memories, and she and her husband, Warren, would stop by and saw Paul when he was in the rest home and in the hospital. And she said, Paul wanted ice cream. So I brought 3 kinds of ice cream, and he chose coffee. So I'll always remember Paul, I'm spooning out coffee ice cream, and he's going, and that's just like Paul. I did not get to go see Paul when he was in the hospital or in the home. I've been dealing with his bum leg. He and I had been trying to set up lunch for at least 5 or 6 months. And Bonnie girl, is it time for lunch? No, Paul, my knee, I can't drive, can't do this. So when I heard that he was in the hospital, I called about Joe, and he passed the phone to me. It was a Saturday after he went in. And I said, boy, you'll do anything to get out having lunch with me. And that did get a laugh out of him. But I want to tell you this, and then I'm going to pass this on to Terry, and then to all of you for sharing. I did get to tell Paul that day how very, I'm going to not do this, how very, very much I loved him. And what a special person he was to me. And that was really important for me to be able to do. And he confided that the feeling was mutual. And I still love him, and we miss him very much. Terry, it's all yours.
Even though Paul is no longer with us, I come to HART and I see him everywhere I go. Just walking up to the front door and looking in the yard, he's got a bird bath, his solar bird bath. He's got a hose reel thing that you wind the hose around that he made. You walk into retail, he's made a magnet board for the magnets, the photos that Marilyn has done. You walk into the kitten room, and there's a cat climbing thing that he put up. You go into another cat room, and there's wall shelves for the cats to climb on. And then you finally reach the patio room, which without Paul, we would not even have. He's the one that wanted to financially build this and give it to the cats so that they had an area with lots of windows and a lot of space for them to walk around. We call it Camp Jaeger.
Kitty Camp Jaeger.
Kitty Camp Jaeger. Have a little sign up there.
There is actually another Camp Jaeger for children, human children, up on Happy Hill, so this one is Kitty Camp Jaeger.
Yeah.
And I understand his uncle underwrote.
Really?
Yeah.
Ah,
Yes.
That's part of Paul's family, yeah.
My grandfather and grandmother started camp.
oh, okay.
Oh, wow.
Okay, that's good to know. And so, you know, just going into all the rooms, I just see bits and pieces of Paul in there. He took our middle garage and he built shelving in there. He did so much maintenance. If anything was not working, if the blinds weren't working, if something out in back wasn't working, they'd give Paul a call and he'd show up. But to me, the most clever thing that he did was to make supports for the banners that the adoption committee puts out.
Yes.
They needed some way to have freestanding banners, and Paul started thinking about that and considering all the things that it needed to have to make it work, and he came up with just a really clever idea where he put 2 wood supports into the ground. He even had a template on how far apart they should
That's
be.
right.
I went with him.
And he carried everything in the back of the Tesla.
Yeah, in his Tesla. I rode up there with him in his
Had to fit in
Tesla.
the back of the Tesla.
Had to fit there. And he used all this PVC pipe, and he had it all just so perfectly designed that everything went together beautifully. And then you'd put the banner up and use these little bungee cords and support the banner with that. And we even had people coming up and looking at it, trying to figure out how it was made so they could put their banners up the same way that Paul had done it. It was extremely clever. And so we really miss Paul, we really do. Thank you.
I did well with Terry. I wanted to just
Sure,
give another
go ahead.
example. Because as Terry said, we miss him. Not only do we miss Paul, but boy, do we miss him for the stuff he's able to do. And I'm sure Gary feels about 1,000,000 times, so he's sick of getting my emails. But Paul will come down every day. Okay, so I'm telling you guys about this because I think it's funny. Ann knows exactly what it is. Okay, so for the different rooms, we have a different color to identify the cleaning tools. And I forget, for like the longest time, the tapes were always disappearing. It was just, one of those things where it was frustrating every time you had to identify a tool because you just couldn't find the stuff. So I also worked just a little bit part-time at a place that's closer to Paul's, and one day I went over on my lunch break and he was in his garage. And he had gone, because at first he was like, no, let's just spray paint him, because he'd always come up with some other idea too, He was like, oh, let's just spray paint him. And I said, I think the tape's just going to work better. I came over and he was in his garage, and he'd gone and gotten all these tapes, and he was like, look, Julie, and he was working on this chain, because he said if I hook them all together in this chain, probably nobody is going to, take off with it. So, thank God he did. I have this for however long it lasts.
My name was Jaeger. But he used to come through, and my grandmother lived in Kalinga, I live in Kalinga, and he would always come through and stay the night with her, or stop and visit at least and get a good meal on his way up to Shaver.
Paul likes food.
Oh yeah, and he liked her cooking. She was a good cook. And it was funny because he was very outdoorsy and frugal, both. And he would stay the night, and he wouldn't sleep in the house. He would put up a tent outside in her backyard. And it just baffled her. She'd always come, I don't know why Paul's sleeping outside. That's kind of a story I thought of.
Anybody else? Joe, you have anything to share with us?
I want Gary to share the rock story
Wow.
The rock, come on, you gotta remind me of the rock.
in the backpack.
Oh!
So Paul was a bit of a prankster.
It was the final day out. Paul liked to make sure he had it planned down to the last ounce that last day. He'd pick up his backpack with one finger. I found a horseshoe. So I snuck it in the back behind all the paperwork and everything. I thought for sure Paul's gonna find it at Shaver. Well, I get a call when he's home. Gary, Anna just burst out laughing. He found the horseshoe. But later he got me back because he put the horseshoe in the
Okay.
hubcap of my thing. I never let Paul know that I knew that he put it there.